If you wanted exciting sports car designs, then the early 70s were a great time to be alive. Gandini produced the Lamborghini Countach, a follow-up to the gorgeous Miura. Ferrari had the 365 GT4 BB, but more affordable sports cars were still stuck in the early 60s, cars like the MGB, the Triumph Spitfire and the Alfa Romeo Spider. Beautiful cars certainly to modern eyes, but in the early 70s they looked old-fashioned. The Lamborghini Countach, on the other hand, was bang up to date, and the person who styled it, Marcello Gandini, bought us a more affordable yet equally stylish sports car in 1972, the Fiat X1. Like the Countach, it was mid-engined for excellent weight distribution, which made it more fun than a clown fight in a bouncy castle. It had a removable targa top for open-air summer driving, and for such a small sports car, it was surprisingly practical. But why did Fiat wash their hands of it in 1982, forcing Bertone to take over production and rebrand it the Bertone X1? And who's created a new sports car based on the X1 concept that will be delivered to customers in the summer of 2026? This is the Fiat X1 story. The Fiat X1 didn't start life as a Fiat, but as an Auto Bianchi, a car company that Fiat had acquired in 1968. Seeing a gap in the small car market, Auto Bianchi had produced the A112, the first front-engine, front-wheel drive super mini hatchback. Like the British Mini, the wheel at each corner made it great to throw around bends, and the platform derived from the Fiat 128 would form the basis of the all-conquering Fiat 127. So when Fiat approached styling house Bertone for a concept design that may lead to a replacement for the Fiat 850 Spider, the company naturally looked to base it on Auto Bianchi's Super Mini. The job was given to chief stylist Marcello Gandini, who decided to create a basic roadster, or barchetta. In Italian, barchetta means little boat, and Gandini took that meaning to heart. Where existing cars had rounded edges, Gandini looked to competition boats and their sharp-edged wedge design. Like those competition boats, it didn't have any doors, you were simply supposed to step into it. The rear had a low area reminiscent of a swim platform along with an exposed fuel tank. The lights were mounted high and to the rear in an interesting way to get around height rules given the car had such a low bonnet. There was almost no windscreen to speak of. Drivers would have to be prepared to eat some insects. Inside it was boat-like as well, with soft surfaces covered in leather using colours seen in sports boats of the time. The speedometer plonked on top of the dashboard was also in the style of a nautical compass. But this wasn't style with no substance. Bertone were insistent the car should have a transverse mid-engine layout. In their opinion, this was the best solution for a no-compromise sports car. They'd done just that with the Lamborghini Miura in 1966, and they'd been talking it up ever since. Gandini might have looked at the Auto Bianchi A112 Super Mini platform, and the concept was called the Auto Bianchi A112 Runabout, but there was very little A112 in the actual concept car. Maybe it was a lack of time, but the car was actually based on the existing Fiat 850 Spider. To make the car mid-engined, the Bertone team under Gandini chose the Fiat 128 1.1 litre front-engined front-wheel drive powertrain and moved it to the rear. This same trick was used to great effect in the 1990s with the MGF using the front end of the Rover Metro. Despite warm reception for the concept at the 1969 Turin Motor Show, Fiat passed on having the runabout or something like it replace the 850 Spider. But Bertone's love for their creation hadn't dimmed. They continued to refine the design, focusing on making it a more practical proposition, both for the customer and the production line. And a good thing they did as well, because as the 1970s came around, Fiat came looking for an 850 Spider replacement once again, preferably something that could sell in North America. After all, small European sports cars were a hot commodity over there. They saw the refined runabout and agreed to put it into production. The project was given the Fiat production code X19. X0 was used for engines, X1 for passenger cars, and X2 for commercial vehicles. The X19 was the 9th car developed under this system. What hadn't changed since the original runabout concept was the Fiat 128 derived transverse mid-engine setup. It was a good idea, so why change it? The fuel tank moved between the engine and the driver, allowing for a small but useful boot, and a better balanced car also with improved handling. Bertone got help making this setup work when they viewed the 1970 Bizzarini 128P custom car that used this same engine and layout. Another vehicle that helped was the Lancia Stratos, also developed under the Fiat umbrella and also styled by Gandini. Being similarly sized mid-engine sports cars, lessons learned on one vehicle could be applied to the other. For example, the X1 used a stiff chassis that integrated a rollover hoop with a front air dam to plant the car on the ground. The essence of the runabout design, though, was carried through, softened to make it more practical. It would have actual doors and an actual windscreen. The headlights were moved up to the front and popped up because the bonnet was still very, very low, and of course, pop-up headlamps are very, very cool. The runabout was an open top. US safety regulations looked as though they might effectively ban convertibles, and Fiat had its eye on selling the X1 stateside to take some of the market held by MG and Triumph. This meant the X1 couldn't be truly open to the elements, but Fiat and Bertone came up with a good compromise. They designed a removable Targa panel that, when removed, made the car like an open top with a rollover hoop. The Targa panel could be neatly stowed under the bonnet. Bertone needed the prototype cleaning and repainting and entrusted the work to an outside body shop so as not to disturb their workflow. Unbeknown to Bertone, the design was shown to rival Alejandro de Tomaso, who produced an almost verbatim copy shown at the 1971 Turin Motor Show. The surprise reveal of the X1 was blown. Both Fiat and Bertone were incensed. To make matters worse, there was talk of de Tomaso putting the 1600 Spider, as they called it, into production. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. Fiat was closer to production, and in any case Fiat and Bertone could make the case in any potential lawsuit that it was their design. De Tomaso backed down. One thing that's odd about this story, though, is the person who made the copy, Tom Chada. He was no second-rate stylist. This was the man who'd already penned the Fiat 124 Sport Spider and the Ferrari 365 California, and would go on to design the first-generation Ford Fiesta. Why was he making a knockoff, something that was likely to damage any chance he'd ever have of working with Fiat in the future? Was this just a big blunder, something that he wished he'd never got himself into? And why did de Tomaso make such a blatant rip-off in the first place? Some say Fiat were dragging their heels about putting the X1 into production, and de Tomaso wanted to force their hand. There's another theory that de Tomaso wanted to impress partner Ford with a splashy new design to get their support. Regardless, the Fiat X1 shape was now public, and Fiat had to get their car to market smartish. The launch was delayed until after the 1972 Turin Motor Show, so it didn't upstage the launch of the Fiat 126. But it gave Fiat an Apple-like just one more thing moment after the show to present their new sports car. The press probably said, "Oh, this looks like a de Tomaso 1600 Spider we saw last year." And then Fiat had to do the whole explanation about that mess. But when that was out of the way, it was clear that this was a genuinely innovative replacement for the 850 Spider. After all, where else could you get a budget mid-engine sports car with great handling and great looks? The closest rival was the Volkswagen Porsche 914, but that car cost about a third more. The X1 was excellent value. Like the MX-5 that arrived 20 years later, the focus wasn't on raw power but on fun, taking the essence of the concept and turning it into an everyday vehicle. Being so low to the ground, like the concept, you could skip the doors altogether and just hop into the car. Reviewers agreed this was an excellent sports car for the open road. This extraordinary car needed a name to stand out from the crowd. So rather than the standard 3-digit numbering system, Fiat took the unusual step of naming the car after its codename, the X1. There was independent suspension and disc brakes on all four wheels, not a given in 1972. Inside it might be compact and bijou with precious little space for 6-footers given the fuel tank and spare wheel that had to be shoehorned between the seats and the engine. When it came to luggage, Fiat had you covered with space in the boot for a couple of good-sized bags. In fact, on some models, the car came with a couple of complementary bags that fit perfectly. And there was also a large amount of space up front. The mid-engine layout meant the engine bay was cramped, at least for the time, and this made servicing harder, but that was part of the price you had to pay to drive a sports car. The driver had all the necessary controls to hand, with warning lamps for every eventuality. While it didn't attain supercar speeds with just a 1.3 litre 74 horsepower engine, the lightweight body got the 0 to 60 time down to 12.3 seconds. This car wasn't all about speed. In fact, it's a lot of fun to try to wring the last bit of power from the engine with strategic gear shifts. With excellent handling, this was a car that just put a smile on your face. The Fiat X1 came to North America in 1974, where it was a breath of fresh air compared to aging MGs and Triumphs. It managed to keep up with the 1.8 litre MGB, even though it had a smaller, more fuel-efficient engine. The tiny interior made it a natural competitor to the smaller MG Midget and Triumph Spitfire, both of which it beat on performance. The first X1 Fiat brought to the US shores was almost the same as the one that they sold in Italy, just with slightly larger bumpers to accommodate new US crash laws. It seems these weren't enough to satisfy the authorities though, as a year later the X1 grew horrific new appendages that did nothing to improve its looks. After a few years, Fiat managed to alter them into something that may or may not look better depending on your opinion. Emissions rules sapped the power a little compared to the European model, as did the optional air conditioning, but it still gave the X1 a 0 to 60 time of 13.2 seconds. That was sufficient for many, and like Fiat hoped, their pocket sports car found a loyal fan base in the USA. 2 out of every 3 cars produced would be sold there. The Lancia Stratos might be Fiat Group's mad motorsports racer, but that didn't stop thoughts of putting the X1 on the track almost as soon as it launched. The Filippinetti X1 was produced with Fiat's help and used a souped-up 158 horsepower 1.3 litre engine. It was shown just 4 months after the X1 launched. Fiat subsidiary Abarth developed an X1 prototype with a 1.8 litre 16-valve engine. It was raced in a few rallies, winning 3. Bertone stood ready to produce the necessary 500 homologation specials for Group 4 type approval, but Fiat had other ideas, instead putting their weight behind the Fiat 131 Abarth. Dallara entered their version of the X1 in Group 5 racing in 1975. Initially, the 1.3 litre 16-valve engine produced 192 horsepower, but was soon swapped out for a 1.6 litre producing over 230 horsepower. Combine that with a glass fibre body that brought the weight down to 690 kilos, and you had a potent racer, one that could be bought and raced, and many did just that throughout the late 1970s and into the 80s. To keep sales ticking over, by 1976 Fiat offered a few upgrades. Black side decals made the car more dramatic, and there was new metallic colours and fog lamps. Leatherette gave way to stripy fabric because, well, it was the 70s after all. Fiat owned Ferrari at the time and used the Formula 1 driver Niki Lauda to help sell the X1 with a special edition. By 1976, right-hand drive customers could finally try the X1 for themselves, as Fiat made an official conversion primarily to enter the large UK market. In the summer it was fun with the top down, but as soon as the rain appeared or it got cold, the removable hardtop and heater made the car very practical. More power came in 1978 with a larger engine and 5-speed gearbox. The 1.3 litre Fiat 128 engine became 1.5 litres, now delivering 84 horsepower. This dropped the 0 to 60 time down by about a second, a small but welcome improvement. The 5-speed gearbox was smooth and responsive, what Car and Driver called like rowing a screwdriver through a bucket of STP. Unfortunately, the larger American bumpers were adopted for all markets. This was likely to save costs as so many cars were being sold in the US. Inside there were new ergonomic seats, a revised dashboard with the option of a digital clock and a radio cassette player to accompany the sound of the burbling engine behind you. 1978 was also the year the X1 made it to Australia and New Zealand, oddly enough as a 1.3 litre 4-speed, just as the car in Europe had got its upgrade to a larger engine, but it would quickly get the more powerful powertrain. Given the large import fees though, it wasn't cheap, but it also became a niche import into Japan. Like almost all 70s cars, the X1 used carburetors, but the cost of fuel injection was dropping rapidly. Fiat added a Bosch fuel injection system to the X19 in 1980, not for power, although it dropped the 0 to 60 time down by another second and a half. It was done to meet new US emissions rules, first in California in 1980, then across the rest of the country a year later. Europeans didn't get fuel injection and had to make do with old-fashioned carburetors throughout the car's life. Bertone were very proud of their pocket rocket. They'd been the lone voice that saw the potential and put their own money behind making it happen. They produced every X19 monocoque at their factory. No wonder then that their logo was on the side of every car sold.
A Fiat Strada will go well over 300 miles on a tank full of gas. That's a lot farther than the gas engine Rabbit.
But in the early 1980s, Fiat's North American sales were on life support. Fiat had to focus on their home market, not on selling small cars to a country that loved land yachts. The X19's largest market might be North America, but it was a niche vehicle. Bertone weren't ready to throw in the towel on their beloved sports car. A compromise was reached. Bertone would assume full responsibility of the car's production, and their sports car would be rebranded as the Bertone X19. There would be changes, although only small ones. There would be better rust protection, the front footwells were revised to enhance legroom for large Americans who were going to buy one, seats and the steering wheel got leather, and some said the fit and finish improved under Bertone's watch. As the X19 was now no longer a Fiat, it meant it needed to pass a new Australian design rules test before it could be sold, and Bertone also needed to find new showrooms to sell it in. All this meant the X19 had to be withdrawn from the Australian market. It would take until 1988 until all of this would be straightened out, and the Bertone X19 appeared on roads down under with US fuel injection to satisfy Australian emissions laws. Now Bertone had control of their car, they sought to broaden its appeal. With the threat of US legislation on open tops fading, a Spider prototype was produced. The fixed rear window and sail panels were deleted, changed for a smaller roll bar. Bertone worked with the Canadian Alcan company to make an all-aluminium X19 Superlight with a body weight about 2/3 that of the conventional steel body. Maybe the most interesting variant was the Passo Lungo, a 2+1 produced in 1981. In the regular car, the fuel tank sat behind one seat and the spare wheel behind the other. Bertone added 5 centimeters to the length of the car, but managed to squeeze the spare wheel next to the fuel tank, providing barely enough room for a tiny rear passenger seat. The side panel got an extra opera window to provide them with a little light in this tight, cramped space. Given the increased weight, Bertone installed a larger 2-litre engine. One downside was the longer Targa top would now no longer fit into the front boot, which ironically made this more practical car less practical. These were all interesting ideas, but none of them went into production. With more limited US distribution and a car that didn't look much different from when it launched 15 years earlier, it was inevitable that sales would dry up, especially when it was put up against new rivals like the Toyota MR2. 1987 was the last year for the X19 in North America, although a few would be imported by committed fans up until 1990. The X19 was sold for a couple more years in Europe, but production ended in 1989. Fiat had no interest in a replacement. By this stage, they were far too focused on fighting off European and Japanese competition in their core mass-market model range. That's a shame, as one Japanese competitor, Mazda, saw the demand for fun sports cars like the X19 and built the highly successful MX-5. Fiat felt this was a car that they should have produced and looked for a way to produce a competitor. Rather than starting with the X19 platform, they used the Fiat Punto, producing the appropriately named Fiat Barchetta, or Little Boat, a nod to the old Italian roadsters, the cars that had inspired the boat-like A112 runabout concept. The car was ready in 1995, styled by Andreas Zapatinas. If you want to see a video about that car with Andreas giving his insight, click on the link above. Bertone went bankrupt in 2014, but despite this, it wasn't the end for the X19 story. Bertone's new owners created an audacious new project, the new Runabout, which takes inspiration from that first A112 runabout concept. The powertrain went old school, a Toyota 3.5 litre V6 producing 475 horsepower, no electric power here. The chassis was widely reported to be based on the Lotus Exige, which was no bad thing. The concept appeared in 2024 and looked amazing, but it couldn't match the X1 on price. This wasn't a roadster for the masses. The new runabout had an estimated retail price of £330,000, 390,000 euros. Bertone said 25 would be produced, with production starting in the summer of 2026. This might be a continuation of the X1, but if you're looking for something more in the spirit of the original car, I'd recommend test driving a Mazda MX-5 RF. In the days before shared standardised platforms, Bertone came up with a very clever way of reusing parts to create an affordable, fun sports car. With front-engine, front-wheel drive configurations still novel, coming up with the idea of using the Fiat 128 front end at the back was a masterstroke. Being a coach builder who knew how to package vehicles, they worked their magic on the X1, creating something attractive and comfortable, with just enough equipment to hit the sweet spot for customers looking for a modern replacement for their MG Midget. The X1 is maybe the best car Bertone ever created, and a testament to the people who work there. If you want to see a video about the MG Midget, there's a link on the right. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.